Throughout history, there have been three primary unknowns that have confronted the human race. The first is that of the mind. Despite centuries of analytical research and study, the human brain remains a vessel of the unknown. And though more information is gathered each day at an accelerating pace, unanswered questions continue to reign over the most commanding organ of the human body. The second unknown lies within the world's oceans. With only 5% or so of the Earth's oceans thoroughly charted and explored, one may pose the question, what answers that are hidden away by the depths of mystery are waiting to be uncovered? The third and final unknown is what lies beyond. Like the human mind and the extensive quality of the ocean, the universe is riddled with questions of deep complexity and limitless space. Does life exist on other planets, and if so, what type of life? Are we alone, or are we merely a puzzle piece of a greater image? Our fascination with the stars is as great as outer space itself. Since the dawn of time, stories of bizarre objects in the sky and close encounters with alleged extraterrestrial life have captured our imaginations and have only fed into our collective curiosity. A number of these cases, however, are so extraordinary and compelling, they have gained the attention of both well-respected organizations and governments, with such events often being actively investigated even decades after they occur. The following cases are the top 13 UFO sightings and alien encounters of all time. Number 13. The Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting. Washington State, the 24th of June, 1947, will forever be known as the time and place of the first major UFO incident in modern American history. While flying on a routine business trip in his own plane, Kenneth Arnold, a highly experienced aviator with well over 9,000 hours in flight time, decided to take a detour path upon hearing of a hefty monetary reward offered to any pilot that could find a U.S. Marine Corps plane that had crashed near Mount Rainier, the highest mountain in the state of Washington. After an unsuccessful search, Arnold returned to his previous flight route where his life would take a dramatic turn. At an altitude of almost 10,000 feet, Arnold grew startled by a sudden reflection of light off his plane. Initially thinking he had unknowingly collided into another aircraft, Arnold stared out the side of his plane to see 9 strange tailless aircraft flying in formation towards Mount Rainier, with the occasional flashes of light emanating from the flying objects. As the bizarre objects flew between Mount Rainier and the plane, Arnold grew astounded by the unbelievable speed at which the objects were traveling, with an estimation of his tallying 1,700 miles per hour, far quicker than even the most advanced of aircraft at the time. After reporting the incident, Arnold had revealed to the media that the unidentified flying objects were saucer-like in appearance, with one exception being a crescent-shaped craft that served as an outlier. Thus, the term flying saucer was born, with a wave of people across the country reporting similarly shaped objects dart across the sky, with one instance being a United Airlines crew that had come forward in stating roughly 5 to 9 disc-shaped UFOs had followed their plane on their way to Seattle, Washington, approximately 10 days after the Kenneth Arnold sighting. From the shocking incident on that fateful clear sky day in 1947, up until his death in 1984, Kenneth Arnold devoted his life to researching stories that were similar to his own, tirelessly hoping to find answers behind the 9 mysterious flying objects that would come to shape his life. Number 12. The Ilkley Moor alien. While the United States is typically regarded as the focal point of UFO phenomenon in the world, other nations such as the United Kingdom retain countless cases pertaining to such a phenomenon. On the 1st of December, 1987, a retired police officer had gone for a walk on a plateaued yet scenic area known as Ilkley Moor, as a means to visit his father-in-law in East Morton, a small village in the county of West Yorkshire, England. The former officer, who for the sake of concealing his identity utilizes the pseudonym Philip Spencer, had decided to equip himself with a camera and a compass, with the compass being his useful tool in case of fog, a common occurrence in the remote English landscape. During Spencer's walk, he came to notice a peculiar-looking creature up the trail before him, with a skin tone of green and a height of 4 feet with slender arms and an incredibly large head. Whilst the creature waved gestures at Spencer indicating that Spencer must stay away, he quickly resorted to readying his camera and took this now iconic photograph. Once the photo was taken, the creature charged up the hill, with Spencer following it, yet lost the strange entity as it became consumed by the thickening fog. However, a large craft emerged from the moor and rose to the sky, with the craft maintaining a coloration of white and carried a distinctive saucer-like shape. Following the dramatic incident, Spencer decided to travel to East Morton to greet his father-in-law on a route he refused to take previously, yet soon realized that the clocks in the town were all ahead of his watch, and his compass also pointed in the opposite direction than it should have, leading Spencer to conclude that he may have been the victim of an abduction as he was unable to explain the time loss, correlating with a slew of UFO abduction cases in which people report minutes, let alone hours, getting skipped while bizarre occurrences unfold. Easily the most striking element of the Ilkley Moor case is the photograph taken of the entity by Philip Spencer. By far one of the most widely studied photographs in history, with hundreds of examinations being carried out by experts spanning various different fields. Only one verdict has been definitively reached. The image has never been tampered with or manipulated in any way, including via superimposition, the practice of combining two entirely separate images into one picture. The photo, along with Philip Spencer's account, remains shrouded in mystery. Number 11. The bizarre flight of Japan Airlines 1628. On November 17th, 1986, a routine cargo flight taking off from Paris to Anchorage, Alaska, and lastly onto Tokyo, Japan, would find itself embedded in one of the most thoroughly documented and substantiated UFO cases of all. Kenju Terauchi, an ex-fighter pilot and seasoned airline captain with well over 10,000 hours of flight experience, was assigned to pilot the Japan Airlines cargo flight. During much of the flight, nothing of an unusual nature had occurred until JAL 1628, a Boeing 743-200F transport airliner, reached the skies of Alaska at an altitude of 35,000 feet. At 5:09 p.m. Alaska time, while approaching the Anchorage airport after sunset, Captain Terauchi noticed two strange objects, with one hovering to the left of the plane and the other lurking just below the plane. Initially dismissing the two objects as military aircraft that were perhaps secretive, Terauchi's concerns began to mount upon notifying air traffic control in Anchorage of the flying objects, only to be told that the only aircraft detected on their radar systems was his own. Almost immediately, the two objects had appeared right in front of the plane, emitting both flashing lights as well as an intense heat which, according to Terauchi, was so intensive, his face warmed up in rapid progression. The objects maintained a square shape, with a dark line dividing the two sets of lights on each object, and remained in sight until disappearing into the dark of the night, with the pale white light glowing in the direction that the two unidentified craft flew towards that continued to follow the flight crew on their way to Anchorage. Once the plane had reached the city of Fairbanks, however, the city lights revealed a harrowing discovery. The pale white light came to be a silhouette of an enormous mothership-like craft tailing the plane. In an attempt to evade the monstrously large Saturn-like object, Terauchi and his co-pilot changed altitude and even flew in a circle. Yet the UFO continued to shadow them until the craft disappeared once a United Airlines plane, that was requested to investigate the scene on behalf of air traffic control, had arrived to greet Terauchi's plane. Later, after exhaustive investigations and rounds of media speculation, it was uncovered that while general Alaskan flight control centers were unable to detect any objects near the Japan Airlines plane, the US military had decisively tracked the objects throughout the ordeal through advanced radar, even revealing that the object never truly left the scene after the arrival of the United Airlines plane, but had opted to appear behind the United Airlines flight in a possible maneuver to avoid detection and continue following. The sighting lasted for nearly an hour before concluding. Following Terauchi's comprehensive reporting of the incident, Japan Airlines demoted his position, banishing Terauchi to a desk job for quote-unquote embarrassing the company, yet was reinstated as pilot several years later, constantly scoping the skies for the unknown from then on. Number 10. The abduction of Barney and Betty Hill. In the first widely publicized report of an alien abduction in US history, the recently married couple of Barney Hill, an overworked postal service worker, and Betty Hill, a state child welfare caseworker, decided to embark on what they perceived as their 16-month late honeymoon, a well-deserved break from their working lives of the mundane. The New Hampshire couple had devised a road trip through Montreal and Niagara Falls, and all was well until the third night of their honeymoon road trip, September the 19th, 1961. After recharging at a roadside diner, and with the honeymoon coming to a close, the Hills tried to make their way back home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, when a bright light in the sky seemed to follow them the closer they had gotten to their destination. The couple took note of the erratic motion of the object in that it had zigzagged, often ducking behind trees and reappearing, prompting the Hills to pull over as a means to try to understand what exactly was going on. Equipped with a firearm in his pocket and binoculars close to his eyes, Barney, a skilled World War II veteran and ardent skeptic, bore witness to a circular craft with two long extensions, one on each side, housing strange beings in what appeared to be gray uniforms gazing down at him. Within seconds, the couple became drowsy and lost consciousness. Once awake, the Hills found themselves 35 miles down the road and noticed that the time had skipped by 2 hours. Plus, Barney's suit had been scruffed and Betty's dress torn. Following the event, the Hills had done all they can to keep the story a secret as a means to prevent themselves from being both ridiculed and mocked. Yet did privately report the incident to the Air Force, which duly included the story into their UFO research project entitled Project Blue Book, an Air Force initiative that investigated UFO phenomenon across the country from 1952 up until its dissolution in 1969. Still, the Hills were unable to bear the deeply disturbing dreams and mental agony resulting from the traumatic event, prompting them to consult a psychiatrist that specialized in hypnosis. While under hypnosis, more details of their harrowing encounter began to emerge. Being placed in the ship that had hovered over them, the Hills were experimented on, with hair strands and nail fragments being taken away, as well as a 4 to 6 inch metal tube being placed inside Betty's stomach, in what Betty had described as what she felt to be a pregnancy test, a supposed test that left her in immense pain. The beings, described as possessing large black eyes and gray skin, helped in mythologizing the term gray alien, an alleged race of extraterrestrials prominent in various close encounters reported throughout history. Despite their best efforts in concealing the story and hypnosis revelations from the public, a reporter from the now-defunct Boston Traveler had reported their story, thrusting both Barney and Betty Hill into the limelight. Today, a vast collection of items, documents, and even articles of clothing appertaining to the event is held by the University of New Hampshire. Number 9. Flying saucer over Westall. At 11 a.m. on Wednesday the 6th of April 1966, over 200 students and staff from Westall High School in Melbourne, Australia, reported seeing a large grey flying cigar-shaped object that bore a purple hue and was about twice the size of a family car. According to student testimony, the unidentified flying object had descended, hovered over the high school, and disappeared gradually behind a line of trees. Some 20 minutes later, the object had reappeared yet again, increasing in speed, and departed towards the northwest direction. According to a few reports, 5 aircraft, presumably of military origin, had followed the craft during its reappearance. While it may be easy to dismiss such a case as one of mass hysteria and nothing more, perhaps the most compelling aspect of the case is the swift and brutal government response to the event. In May of 2021, retired Westall High School science teacher Andrew Greenwood, one of the staff members that had witnessed the bizarre event, had come forward and testified that Australian government officials had arrived to his home approximately 2 weeks after the event. The two men were deeply unsettled by how vocal Greenwood had been with news reporters regarding the incident, with the men insisting that he had not seen anything and that if he continued to disseminate the story further, he would be at risk of losing his job, a governmental visitation that Greenwood believes was part of a wider Australian government cover-up. In addition, GTV Channel 9 Television, a television station in Melbourne, had run a news report on the strange incident in which Joy Teague, a student that sighted the UFO, described the craft in vivid detail. However, the footage of his account went missing, with the footage being removed from GTV's archive. To commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Westall encounter, former students and staff congregated at the Westall Tennis Club, with many believing the Westall case to be the most celebrated and well-documented UFO sighting in Australian history. Number 8. The Foo Fighters of World War II. In late November 1944, just as the Second World War was entering its final stages on all fronts, U.S. fighter pilot Lieutenant Ed Schluter flew over the Rhine Valley on the French-German border on patrol when suddenly, 8 to 10 fiery orange lights had appeared near his plane in a single-file line. Assuming such lights were part of a secretive German air project, Schluter quickly readied the plane's weaponry, with the lights disappearing as soon as he was prepared to retaliate. Less than a month later, another fighter pilot reported seeing red and green lights form a T-shape, with the said lights following the pilot with a distance of separation between the lights and the pilot only being roughly 1,000 feet. On December 22nd, 2 more flight crews had reported seeing 2 lights in a vibrant orange glow following the crafts for 2 minutes until quickly hovering away, with the lights being described as being under perfect control at all times, in their flight patterning and overall speeds. Another famous sighting is that of Lieutenant Samuel A. Krasny, who claimed to have sighted a glowing red, wingless cigar-shaped object that flew just a few yards away from the wings of his plane, again staying near the plane until abruptly departing. By early 1945, the sightings of the unusual glowing lights had become so universal with both the Allies and Axis reporting the lights, that the US airmen would coin the term Foo Fighters to describe the objects, named after a tidbit from a comic strip known as Smokey Stover, in which the titular clumsy firefighter would typically state, when there's fire, there's foo. Though a consensus exists on the Foo Fighters being blamed on overall war fatigue, the consistency of the descriptions of the Foo Fighters themselves, as found in the majority of reported sightings, does raise the following question. What exactly were they? Plus, where do they come from? Another common explanation is that of highly sophisticated German war technology being utilized late in the war, with the particular culprit being the German V-2 ballistic rocket, a deadly weapon employed by the Germans during the final stretch of the war against Allied liberated European territories such as Belgium, with the German High Command resorting to the V-2 rocket as one of their last-ditch efforts to turn the tide of the war. According to Nicholas Ferronico, An expert and author on the history of military aviation, the German V-2 lacked maneuverability, was notoriously unreliable, and its acceleration pattern was lackluster, ruling out the German V-2 or any component of Germany's war potential at any stage during the war as a suspect behind the Foo Fighters sighting. Number 7. The Falcon Lake Incident. In what is considered to be Canada's best documented UFO case, as well as an incredibly rare instance in which a human being had alleged physical contact with an unidentified flying object, Polish immigrant Stefan Michalek, an industrial mechanic as well as an amateur geologist, would typically venture into the wilderness near Falcon Lake, a lake approximately 150 miles east of Winnipeg, primarily to search for minerals such as quartz and silver. On the 20th of May, 1967, Michalek had come close to stumbling across an abundance of quartz when he became startled by an army of geese that had erupted in a choir of sudden honks. Upon looking up at the sky, Michalek saw two large cigar-shaped objects with a glow of red hover nearly 50 meters away from him. While one of the two objects had departed and effectively disappeared without a trace, the other had descended and landed on flat rock just before Michalek, with the object now appearing to maintain more of the traditional disc shape. Astonished, Michalek had thought of the object as a product of a secret government program, potentially from the United States. While observing the object, Michalek took the time to sketch it, with this depiction being the very same sketch he had made in that moment. After sketching for half an hour, Michalek decided to approach the craft, with the unbearable fumes and scent of sulfur filling his nose the closer he had approached. Though he heard what sounded akin to muffled voices as well as the occasional bright light that had emerged from the interior of the craft, Michalek began verbally projecting over the craft, using such terms as Yankee Boys, a direct reference to the United States, and even uttered statements in his native Polish, Russian, as well as German. After examining the craft, even touching the exterior walls with his industrial glove with the glove's fingertips melting away quickly, the craft began to turn counterclockwise, with Michalek noticing a panel of grit hole. The holes then emitted a burst of air, or a type of gas, onto Michalek's chest, setting his shirt and cap on fire, with the flying object fleeing in the process. Michalek then retreated to the woods, both distressed and nauseous, yet managed to catch a bus to Winnipeg, where he was subsequently treated for burns to his chest and stomach, with the burn area having produced a grid-like pattern identical to the grid panel on the side of the ship, as documented in Michalek's depiction of the craft, single-handedly substantiating his otherworldly encounter. Curiously, following the event, Michalek's burns emitted a nauseating aroma of sulfur and burnt motor. In the subsequent weeks, months, and years, the lives of the Michalek family would turn upside down, with constant visitations by both Canadian and American Air Force personnel and government agents from numerous agencies bombarding the family with questions and often unannounced visitations. According to the official government conclusions reached by both the US and Canada, the event remains unexplained. Number 6. The Flatwoods Monster. On the night of September the 12th, 1952, in the small town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, three young boys named Tommy Heyer, Fred May, and Edward May gazed up at the sky to see a large bright object stroke across the sky and crash near the farm of local farmer G. Bailey Fisher. Intrigued, they enlisted the attention of both Fred and Edward's mother Kathleen, as well as local children Neil Nunley and Ronnie Shaver, and West Virginia National Guardsman Eugene Lemon to investigate the crash site. Once they had reached a hill on their way to the suspected crash site, Lemon shined his flashlight towards a pulsating red light present in the area in front of them, only to reveal a man-like figure with a round red face surrounded by a pointed, hood-like shape. According to the account, due to the flashlight's illumination on the creature had exuded a hissing noise and charged towards the group, enabling the witnesses to escape. According to the overarching eyewitness description, the entity dubbed as the Flatwoods Monster exhibits a height of 10 feet or 3 meters, a round blood-red face, a large pointed hood-like shape, and a dark or green skirt-like lower body, with Kathleen May stating that the creature maintained claw-like hands protruding from its body. Simultaneously, the local sheriff and a deputy had been actively searching for a downed aircraft within the proximity of the area, with a news reporter coming forward by stating that skid marks as well as a mysterious gummy deposit had been found in the location of the Flatwoods encounter. As a result of the Flatwoods incident, national news had heavily reported the story, and the US Air Force had launched an inquiry into the encounter, largely as a symptom of the constant scoping of the skies for potential Soviet aircraft in the form of spy planes or bombers, with the Flatwoods case emerging as one of the first cases incorporated into Project Blue Book. Though the creature has never been sighted since September of 1952, the Flatwoods Monster has become one of the premier figureheads of UFO phenomenon. Number 5. The UFO Invasion of Washington, D.C. At 11 p.m. on July 19, 1952, an air traffic controller named Edward Nugent, who was stationed in the then-named Washington National Airport, spotted 7 unidentified flying objects on his radar. Bizarrely, no known aircraft were in the area, and the objects were doing anything but following any established flight routes, with both Nugent and his superior, Harry Barnes, immediately adhering to the notion that the objects, whatever they were, defied all flight logic. Later, on Saturday the 26th of July at 8:15 p.m., radars across Washington, D.C. began to detect the same enigmatic blip objects it had spotted previously, with the flying objects overtaking the radar screens at an overwhelming rate as they had done a week prior. Certain objects maintained a slow flight pace, whereas others had traveled at speeds upwards to 7,000 miles per hour. Over 3 hours later at 11:30 p.m., while the UFOs continued to swarm the Washington, D.C. area, 2 U.S. Air Force F-94 Starfire planes were dispatched to investigate the sightings, with one of the pilots chasing the objects of mystery at maximum speed, yet had halted his pursuit amid reaching the epiphany that there was no feasible way in which he could realistically overtake the radar blips. Later in the night, 2 more F-94s were deployed to gauge the skies. Yet when one had encountered a powerful white light, the light had vanished. The abundance of UFO sightings over Washington, D.C. became a major source of intrigue for the administration of Harry S. Truman, the 33rd President of the United States, who insisted that rational explanations be found of the large wave of sightings, a request that led to various panels and press briefings addressing the matter at hand, including the largest Pentagon press conference since World War II, in which the waves of sightings in the skies over Washington had been blamed on weather patterns and meteorites, or misidentified city lights. By contrast, many figures within the government came to dispute the official Air Force explanation, including former radar controller Howard Coughlin, who claimed that he had seen the unidentified blip objects on his radar screen as well as outside the window of his control tower over Washington National Airport during the Washington UFO frenzy. Number 4. The Hopkinsville Goblin Attack. The Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter, like the Falcon Lake incident, is yet another seldom example of physical contact between humans and alleged otherworldly factors. During the late evening of August 21st, 1955, in the small town of Kelly, Kentucky, 2 families composed of 7 children and 5 adults were enjoying a dual family get-together at a rural farmhouse, with the host family being the Sutton family, a large extended family that resided in the farmhouse for years. According to soon-to-be-filed police reports, Sutton family friend Billy Ray Taylor, whom had traveled to the Sutton family with his wife due to his deep friendship with Lucky Sutton, had seen a bright object exhibiting multiple colors hovering over the farmhouse and descending to the ground near it. After an hour of mocking Taylor's UFO story, the Suttons grew alert by their dog that had been barking incessantly, propelling both Lucky and Taylor to investigate the backyard, in which the dog grew especially wary of. To their surprise, a short, humanoid, 3.5-foot tall creature with an oversized head, long arms, and oversized glowing eyes of yellow had emerged from the darkness, with an apparent skin being within a zone of silver coloration. After equipping themselves with a shotgun and a rifle, they fired at the entity, with the supposed goblin-like creature flipping over and consequently running into the woods. What culminated was a night of sheer terror and almost slapstick madness, with well over a dozen goblin creatures stalking the family by appearing at windows and doorways, with rounds being fired at windows as a means to harm the creatures, but to no avail as the entities seemed impenetrable. Freakishly, during the siege, Taylor had stepped outside underneath the overhanging roof when a claw-like hand reached down and had touched his hair, with the family reacting by screaming and pulling Taylor back into the house, with Taylor responding by firing a round into the overhanging facet of the roof. After spending several hours hiding away from the creatures, the Suttons decided to travel to the Hopkinsville police station. Once there, the families were documented as being unbelievably shaken with fear. Once police, state police, and even military police had arrived at the scene, no sign of the strange creatures were found, yet a litany of shell casings, a nightmarish amount of property damage, and a clear absence of alcoholic beverages were all noted. After leaving, the creatures had emerged yet again, yet disappeared before sunrise. 2 fascinating features remain in the Kelly-Hopkinsville case. First, upon arriving to the scene, as well as all throughout the night, law enforcement officials have cited seeing unexplainable lights in the skies over Kelly on the night of the encounter. And second, when these vivid depictions were being drawn, the adult eyewitnesses that had given the information to the sketch artists in regard to the close encounter were all individually interviewed and away from the farmhouse, yet still showed remarkable consistency in both illustrating and relaying what they had seen. The Kelly-Hopkinsville case would immediately serve as an origin point for the iconic labeling of Little Green Men. Number 3. The Wanaque UFO. Like many parts of the world, 1966 proved to be an explosive year for the UFO phenomenon, and yet another case that furthers this notion is that of the UFO over Wanaque, New Jersey, a setting that would see a flurry of UFO activity all throughout the year. On January 11th, 1966, a patrolman named Joseph Cisco received a call from a dispatcher informing him of an army of callers from towns all across northeast New Jersey who had claimed to have seen a bright light akin to a fire shoot across the region, with the words flying saucer being included in the dispatch. To Cisco's amazement, a large light the size of a softball began pulsating and changing colors, with the object being designated as much bigger than a star and hovering over the Wanaque Reservoir. Continuing its flight, the ball of light had shifted from white to red to green, and then back to white. Meanwhile, Cisco's radio began to malfunction, and to Cisco's amazement, word soon spread of the object emitting a bright beam into the reservoir. piercing a large hole into the ice, of which the object had done for half an hour. In terms of photographic evidence, precisely 5 photographs of the mysterious object were taken depicting the incredible beam, yet the photographer went unidentified for 50 years until being identified as Claude Coutant. Eventually, the UFO quickly rose up to the sky and vanished, astonishing the hundreds of people that saw the otherworldly craft. Soon, the United States government claimed the fantastic sight was that of a helicopter shining its beam of light onto the reservoir, a claim immediately dismissed by the devout witnesses. Sightings of the mysterious craft over the Wanaque Reservoir would continue throughout 1966. Number 2. Declassified Pentagon UFO footage. In 2019, the US Navy formalized a reporting process in which pilots were given the green light to report UFO sightings and encounters. Coinciding with such a formalization, in 2020, the Pentagon comprehensively released and declassified 3 pieces of footage from 3 different incidents that purport to show unidentified flying objects, with the videos being designated as unexplained by the Department of Defense. In order of occurrence, the first of the 3 videos documents an unusual flying object spotted on the 14th of November 2004 that was discovered by the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group off the coast of Southern California. The strike group, that had been investigating sightings of unknown aircraft for 2 weeks preceding the event, dispatched fighter pilot commander David Fravor to actively investigate. Upon searching, Fravor had encountered a white flying object in the shape of an oval hovering above water, with an estimate of 40 feet or 12 meters long. Accompanying Fravor was a pilot by the name of Alex Dietrich, whom had also reported seeing the exact same object that Fravor saw. Once Fravor attempted to retrieve a clearer and more patent visual of the object swiftly disappeared. To investigate the matter further, a second wave of fighter pilots that included Lieutenant Commander Chad Underwood took off from the USS Nimitz. Unlike his peers and subordinates, Underwood's plane was equipped with an advanced camera capable of detecting objects easily missed by the human eye. The result is the following video known as FLIR. The following 2 videos were taken between 2014 and 2015 by fighter pilots a part of the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group off the east coast of the United States. The first is entitled Gimbal, whereas the other is labeled Go Fast, with the objects labeled in the 2 videos as well as the 2004 Nimitz footage as Tic Tacs.
There's a whole fleet of them, look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like another thing, it's rotating. Nickel 6-1 tank, Roger. Oh, God! Woohoo! Roger. There's troubleshooting. Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at him fly.
The following 4 cases serve as honorable mentions. The Shag Harbor Incident. On October 4th, 1967, an unidentified flying object crash-landed in the waters of Shag Harbor in Nova Scotia, Canada. After exhaustive search and rescue efforts, as well as confirmations that it would have been impossible for an airplane to crash into the harbor according to findings that no aircraft had been missing even prior or after the incident, the Canadian government designated the incident as a UFO report, with eyewitnesses claiming a bizarre foam had emanated from the water. The Pascagoula Abduction. In 1973 Mississippi, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker claimed to have been abducted by strange, tall, eyeless extraterrestrials with distinct appendages whilst on a fishing trip. While under investigation, the 2 men were secretly recorded when they sat alone in a room together against their knowledge, and as opposed to laughing or chuckling assuming they were running an elaborate hoax, they were audibly frightened and disturbed by what they had witnessed as they discussed privately. The Phoenix Lights. On the 13th of March, 1997, residents across the city of Phoenix, Arizona had equipped themselves with their VHS cameras and began recording an enormous dark triangular-shaped unidentified flying object that remained for a considerable amount of time. Seen by police officers and townspeople alike, the origin of the lights remains unknown, despite suggestions that military flares or advanced, top-secret aircraft were the culprits. The Roswell Incident of 1947. In easily the most widely studied, groundbreaking, and earth-shattering UFO case in history, just 2 weeks after the Kenneth Arnold sighting, The US government announces a discovery of a flying disc recovered from a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico, with photographs and other records documenting collected debris from the supposed crash site. Almost immediately, the government backtracked on their initial reporting, claiming to have obtained a downed weather balloon instead, leading to a 70-plus history of speculation concerning cover-ups, secret experiments, and psychological operations stemming from Roswell. The full truth may never be known, yet one case within the domain of UFO phenomenon surpasses even that of Roswell in its indescribable nature. Number 1. The Battle of Los Angeles. The Battle of Los Angeles stands as one of the few cases of unexplained phenomenon in which actual deaths can be attributed towards, as well as arguably the most odd chapter in the history of World War II. Less than 3 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the west coast of the United States had effectively transformed into a bolstered line of defense, with anti-aircraft weapons and artillery pieces installed to repel a highly feared and anticipated Japanese attack on the United States' westernmost states of Washington, Oregon, and California, states that would see eventual repetitive harassments and attacks from the Japanese Empire throughout the war, particularly between 1944 and 1945. On the night of the 24th of February in 1942 in Los Angeles, California, months after the American involvement in the Second World War began, military personnel were told to prepare for any enemy attacks following the events that unfolded a day prior, in which a Japanese submarine had launched an attack against an oil refinery near Santa Barbara, California, with no casualties stemming from the event. At 2 a.m. on the 25th of February, however, military radar detected what appeared to be a hostile aircraft approximately 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Immediately, the city entered into an artificial citywide blackout. Searchlights had begun sweeping the skies, air raid sirens had been activated, and anti-aircraft weapons were being manned in all positions. Just after 3 a.m., when an unidentified flying object had been reported flying above the city, all anti-aircraft weapons had fired upon the object, with every searchlight quickly gravitating towards it. During the military engagement, widespread and ubiquitous speculation arose that a Japanese attack on Los Angeles was indeed occurring, with one report erroneously stating that a Japanese plane had fallen in the center of the city. Yet actual military response, as well as its puzzling aftermath, would tell another story. The shining of the searchlights and firing of the weapons would continue for well over an hour before a cessation command was given, and once the conclusion of the incident was reached, over 1,400 military shells had been fired. Yet in spite of this, signs of an enemy attack were non-existent. Further, no bombs had been dropped by the suspected Japanese planes, and zero in the way of enemy plane wreckage had been recovered. The only damage that had been generated by the ordeal were that of friendly fire, with anti-aircraft shrapnel damaging buildings as well as civilian homes. Tragically, a total of 5 persons perished as a result of the Battle of Los Angeles, all civilian fatalities, with 3 dying from car accidents and 2 succumbing to heart attacks. After the war, the Japanese government officially confirmed that they had never flown their own military aircraft over Los Angeles throughout the entire course of the war. The Battle of Los Angeles was quickly blamed on war jitters as well as a product of false alarm. Yet a library of mysteries remained behind the event, with the elephant in the room remaining. What were they firing at, and why was it unable to be downed? Though an inherently controversial global phenomenon, the fact remains that stories of UFO sightings and alien encounters have captured the human imagination in ways in which most other topics fail to do, and the subject has remained relevant for well over 70 years. Despite the fact, too, that governments across the world, namely the government of the United States, have recently come forward to declassify and disclose information pertaining to the topic of UFOs, now referred to as UAPs, or Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, ranging from Pentagon disclosure to congressional findings, the government has been disclosing, both de facto and officially, such cases and activity for decades. Before becoming the 38th President of the United States from 1974 to January 1977, Gerald R. Ford served as the minority leader for the House of Representatives in 1966, during a time in which Ford tirelessly sought to investigate and reveal the truth behind UFO reports that had swept southern Michigan, the state he represented, as well as other parts of the United States, thus validating UFO phenomenon in official government memoranda. Later, future 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, officially filed a UFO sighting report in 1971, detailing a strange object he had seen 2 years prior, in 1969. Edgar Mitchell, the 6th man to walk on the moon, publicly displayed his enthusiasm for UFO phenomenon, as well as the previously mentioned Project Blue Book, which thoroughly documented and examined a plethora of cases throughout the Cold War. In terms of government inquiry, as well as public interest, such a topic has persisted through the last century. Like the enigma that is the human mind and the stunning depths within our oceans, the universe is a vast and constantly expanding space embroiled in unanswered questions and untapped wells of knowledge, as we may never obtain, for it may be for our own benefit. In the meantime, the skies must be watched, and our minds open, for who knows what may lie beyond.